Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable, episode 179. Lovely to have so many of you with us already. Really looking forward to what's proving to be a really powerful and interesting discussion today. That's very much a huge thanks to James, who will come on to in just a moment, for stepping in last minute. As a few of you noticed, the schedule did change slightly. We had someone who unfortunately couldn't make this week. And then James, who I've met at a couple of events recently, said, well, I can do one. And with the events that obviously occurred last week around damp mould and the questions around, unfortunately, another huge tragedy of the housing space, it felt like a really apt time to bring it to the table. So a massive thank you to James. My name is Matt Baird. I've been running these now for about 4 years. We run these every single Tuesday at 11 a.m. The idea behind them is to create a community from the conversations that matter. And that means exactly what it says on the tin. If you disagree with something, you're welcome. If you have a different viewpoint, you're welcome. Let's engage properly in discussion and discourse that isn't always speaking into an echo chamber, so that we can hear all sides of the story and really try and make a better and informed decision with things moving forward. Today, I'm joined by James Green. So, as I say, James I met at a conference recently. Day to day, I work in recruitment. I also attend a number of the big conferences that go on across the country. But it's through sponsorship really that keeps this roundtable running and available for all. So a huge thank you to James and to Breathe Pure for sponsoring today. Yes, we're still sponsored by our annual sponsors through CMSG and through Alertical, but without people like James, the amount of hours and things that go into making this run and making this work for you all would be a little bit challenging. So huge thank you to James and to Breathe Pure. And James is here today to talk around the real cost of damp and mould by trying to get beyond the surface of maybe where we've talked about before. As I say, obviously we had another tragedy last week. The questions and coroner's report, there are still, I think, investigations going on into how much damp and mould had an effect, unfortunately, in terms of the death of the young boy that happened. But equally, I think it's fair to say that no one wants to be living in conditions like those that the family were living in, and no sane person could really look at the conditions those people were living in and go that wouldn't have some kind of health problems along the way as well, and those would be exacerbated by the damp and mold that was occurring. So I'm going to pass over to James. As I say, huge thank you to him for sponsoring today, to introduce the topic, to introduce kind of the key themes of what we want to talk about today, and to kick the discussion off. If while James is talking you have any points you'd like to make, please feel free to put them in the chat box and I'll make sure they get brought in. But we will then open it into a more open discussion. And we've kind of got everybody in the space today. So we've got people who work directly for housing providers, we've got tenants, and we've got out of sector suppliers or contractors who support the sector. And I want to make sure we're getting a balanced voice from all three. So I will be doing my best to make sure those voices are coming from all three areas of the triangle. As I know, sometimes voices from one side can be louder than others, and that's not a bad thing. I'm just trying to keep this as balanced as possible. So without further ado, James, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Morning, everyone. So this is obviously a fairly hot topic at the moment, and whereas I think we all need to have open debate, as Matt said, it's very key that we have conversations involving all parties, and that's residents, landlords, and maintenance and repairs teams, and the contractors undertaking those works. So it's been almost 5 years, unfortunately, since the death of Awaab Ishak, which at Rochdale we all said would never happen again, and policies come into place to make sure that happens. However, as we all know, last week it was reported that potentially another child may have lost their life due to mould exposure. And what this just really demonstrates is whether he did or didn't die directly as a result of mould, there are still a lot of flats out there with damp and mould issues that are having negative health issues related to the problems and giving respiratory issues to tenants and their families living in these properties. So with Awaab's law coming into force in October, what support does the sector need in order to make sure that everyone is living in a safe, warm environment? Landlords are obviously financially stretched. We all know that. There is a huge amount of backlog in the system in terms of repairs, but there is a lot of goodwill in the sector. And whether that's small companies like myself providing technology, repair companies, landlords and their maintenance teams, and residents, I know from speaking to people on the ground that everyone wants this problem solved, and no one wants to see articles, as we saw last week in the news, about a 15-week-old baby potentially losing his life to damp and mold. So if you are a tenant, it would be really good to hear from you if you are still being left at risk. And for landlords, it's what are the challenges? What can we do in the private sector to help bridge that gap and make sure that we're not leaving tenants exposed? Just some quick figures, just to give some context before we sort of dive into open conversation. Government undertook a survey of 2,000 adults at the end of last year. It found that 22% of those affected with damp had other health issues coming about. 31% of tenants have ongoing mold issues in their home. 37% of tenants have actually been forced to leave their home due to mold. That's across the private and the social sector. Tenants are suffering with huge levels of stress, and it's a 40% number telling the government that mold is causing their anxiety and stress levels to increase. We all know that mental health is a big part of repairs, and it's a silent side of the matter, but it's something that definitely needs to be factored in. Living with mold in your flat, especially if you've got young children or if you have other health issues, can be exceedingly stressful. What I think was really interesting for me when I read these stats is 66% of all the complaints made to the Housing Ombudsman since 2020 relating to damp and mold come from the social sector. So 2/3 of all complaints relating to damp and mold are in the social sector, which, you know, when we look back for 5 years, has been telling us that we're getting on top of it, but the complaints and the rhetoric don't tally up. So obviously more work needs to be done. So the last point I really wanted to make on this is, can we afford to ignore it? You know, that's the big part that really needs to be discussed. Each year it's costing the NHS an estimated £1.4 billion to treat health-related issues from damp and mold and living in cold houses. That money needs to be being spent elsewhere on development. We know there's a housing shortage. Spending that sort of money on fixing damp and mold just from a health issue seems like a huge waste of money. And there's council spending. During Southwark Lib Dems reported that Southwark Council was spending almost £1.8 million through their NHS proportion due to damp and mold. So there's huge amounts of resources going into the sector to fix health issues that could be being deployed elsewhere. So really the question for today is that we want to hear is what needs to be done? What do tenants want done to keep them safe? What do landlords need done to overget the challenges of dealing with damp and mold? And from the repair and contractor side, what do you need in terms of technology to make sure that we don't have more children living in potentially life-threatening situations?
Thank you, James. And I know one of the points that you'd sent me through before was a point that one local authority is spending 1.8 million a year just through its NHS, in terms of just on damp and mold. And when we met and when we were discussing kind of the key themes of what we wanted to look through today, I think it was whether or not the sector is actually willing to invest and become compliant with Awaab's law, or whether they'll continue as we are and just kind of pay out disrepair compensation. What differences are you seeing? And as someone who specialises in this space, and obviously we're never here to name, shame, bully, fixate on one person or one business or anything along those lines, but those conversations you're having, Pete, with people around your tech solution, but more importantly, I think you're quite broad in terms of the tech companies you're getting involved in and the other peer groups you're getting involved in. What are businesses and what are landlords or local authorities saying to you when you're inquiring into their damp, mold, and I guess general health, willingness to change?
Yeah, I get it. Look, we're a solutions company that essentially wants to allow landlords to be compliant with Awaab's law. So we're very much talking to landlords about keeping tenants safe, making sure they can do it in the time frame set out, and actually improve the health of the property and the tenant. That's what we're there to do. So we're engaging with every housing association, every local authority. And I think the default position seems to be we you know, again, we don't want to be pointing fingers and we want to work with the sector, but it's we've got this under control. How? We're putting in the sensors. And we all know there's a lot of providers out there doing a lot of recording of data. And I've done quite a few posts on this. It's making that transition from data collection and, you know, our tenants being overly scrutinized with data, you know, monitoring how many baths they're taking, what they're cooking, are they leaving the windows open, to preventing the situation arising in the first place. We all know we have an aging stock problem, and a lot of that relates to condensation and sometimes damp. And where we step in is we can actually prevent the situation getting to an area where you even need to put sensors in, because tenants alone, if they're living in aging stock, can't always control the humidity in that property. They're going to have issues, no matter whether you put sensors in or not. So it's really trying to educate the sector in terms of, let's prevent the problem rather than just constantly monitoring the data. And if you are getting data, are your teams trained in understanding that data to actually make a meaningful action if there's a problem? So there's a lot of goodwill. Everyone we speak to obviously wants to get on top of the damp and mold issue. We've never spoken to a landlord that hasn't. However, the speed that they're implementing at isn't quick enough. You know, they've had 5 years almost since Rochdale. Doesn't look like huge amounts has been done in terms of preventative measures. And with October coming rapidly, they're still very much getting to grips of, if a tenant rings me with a category 1 damp and mold issue, what am I going to do to be able to rectify that in 24 hours? And that's where we're really urging landlords to engage with us, because we can help in that situation.
But do you think that's where the narrative needs flipping? And I will say, if anybody wishes to dive in or put questions in the chat or anything like that, please feel free. There is a react button at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to raise your hand. I'll bring you in, or alternatively, just actually wave at me on your screen and I'll make sure I catch you. But I think that, is this where you're finding, James, in your opinion, and obviously this is, you know, it's very much, you know, an opinion of you and everything else. Are we waiting for, we don't know what's going to happen if someone sends us a category 1 through and we do something about it? Why is that almost become the default mindset, in your opinion, rather than what are we doing to make sure we never get one? Do you think that's potentially where the biggest challenge is?
If I'm really honest, I'm still unsure. You know, what happened in Camden 2 weeks ago, you know, Notting Hill Genesis at the end of the day, one of the biggest operators, they should be leading by example. Why are they waiting for this sort of situation to come about? They know about the technology. You know, they know that there's technology out there that could prevent situations like that. Is it the CEOs are unaware? Is it they don't have the budget? Or is it they're just under so much strain from backlog and workload that they just don't have capacity? Is there other factors at play that we're unaware of? That's what we're really keen to hear today. You know, if we reach out to some providers, we get really good feedback, and then they go silent for 9 to 10 weeks, and then they ring, go, we've got a problem, we've got a really bad property, we need something tomorrow. Why is it so reactive? Why can't we change the mindset to be preventative rather than constantly chasing, spending a lot more money, a lot more resource, and still having the same problem?
I'm going to bring in Brian. Good to have you with us.
Morning. I will get that unmute button at some stage. No, I can completely understand where you're coming from, James. There seems to be a tick box exercise being carried on. When you look at stock condition surveys don't necessarily look at, for example, a 1-bedroom flat with 15 people living in it. It's not what a lot of the surveys are doing and carrying out. You've got a lot of organizations that are being, yes, very reactive when something goes wrong, but you've got people that are you know, you're talking about Genesis, that you know, the CEO has probably never been in a property. Do they really know what's going on? Do they know what's on the estates? And I hate to use this phrase because I use it quite often. It's having the boots on the ground and the staff who are talking to people, rather than having a head office that's full of staff who are looking at numbers and figures and spreadsheets, but they're missing what's going on. That conversation that needs to happen with tenants and residents in different areas is not happening. I've got a survey on this, I've got a survey on that, I've got tenants' reaction on something else. The conversation is not happening.
So if we take, let's take Camden as an example, and let's try and keep the, you know, let's try and keep it calm, because I know everyone, sometimes it can get all a bit heated. We're talking about a G15 landlord who's aware or unaware that they've got a one-bedroom flat, mum, dad, 3 children. They've been notified there's damp and mold. What does the sector need? And I'd love to hear from anyone who's working at HAs on repairs and maintenance. Where's the trigger points to go, that is going to cause very high humidity? If they've got a broken extractor fan, that is going to trigger damp and mold. So then send a repair guy in who then shuts the window and seals it shut because it's broken. There must be something more than a tick box that allows something reactive to happen. And if that is what HAs are relying on, that tick box program, in terms of just ticking boxes, as you said, Brian, then I really am even more fearful that we're just going to keep getting these cases. But yes, I completely agree with you. It does seem like a lot of overcrowding is causing problems, and there's a lot of tick boxing going on rather than conversations.
And it also doesn't help, obviously, that we have now got generational waiting lists. So I agree, you know, part of the issue, from what I can gather, and I've done nowhere near enough research, and obviously I'm not part of the investigative committee, but if you've got 5 people even living in a one-bed flat with no ventilation, there's only one way that's going.
Yes, it's a problem.
Yeah, for some reason that obvious bit was missed. I know James got his hand up. Elizabeth, I know you can't get your hand up. So James, just before I come to you, I'm going to come to Liz, because I know you've been doing some work on this with the Centre for New Midlands. So Liz, could I bring you in? Hopefully. If you can get Liz unmuted. Alert Call return as one of the keynote sponsors for the Social Housing Roundtable in 2025 into 2026, and we're delighted to have them back. Alert Call help as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. As you can see from this touchscreen I've got with me, Alert Call's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Call, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alert Call work with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and their landlords. In 2022, Alert Call won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023, Alert Call won Housing Supplier of the Year. We're delighted to have them back with us throughout the course of this year, and please do go check them out on social media and LinkedIn to find out more. Thank you very much, Alert Call, for sponsoring us again.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. I'm not going to be on camera this morning. I'm in the middle of something really intense at the moment, but thank you. So I sit on the Think Tank Centre for the Midlands, and we carried out some significant research on tenant satisfaction around retrofit. And this was specifically around removing mould and damp from housing association and local authority properties. Now, the satisfaction levels are incredibly poor. What we are missing, and there is 2 issues here. One is the technical side of things, and the other is the societal issues around the way that tenants are treated. So I mean, I've written about this in the past, but if you are a social housing tenant, there is still a prevalent discrimination and prejudice against you. And this, unfortunately, is systemic within the industry. It's systemic within the associations themselves and the contractors. And I'm not afraid of speaking out about this because it is the truth. The reason these people do not get the standards of accommodation and care that they deserve is because of that prejudice. Now, if this was a private, I mean, no private tenants get treated appallingly as well, but say you were in a hotel and you were paying for a service, you would expect to get that service. Now, when tenants complain that they're not getting their service, they're messed around, they're ignored, and there never seems to be a positive resolution in these circumstances. It always seems to be a battle for them. It always seems to be that they're resisted. And that is really, really disappointing. And somehow we need to change attitudes within the industry. And I know your previous Zoom last week, which I missed, Matt, was about attitudes within social housing, etc. And that is fundamental to how we resolve this. But there's also the technical side. So we have a massive skills shortage in the UK. We have excellent engineers and excellent people who know how to fix all of these things. But it's the people on the ground. Do they have the knowledge and the understanding? And in the industry, we are still making fundamental mistakes, such as putting impervious paint into rooms that are suffering mould and damp that actually create bigger problems. We need whole house solutions. So a building needs to be looked at as one. It's a bit like when you're thinking about your health of your body. It's no good looking at one part of your body. You've got to look at all of it. And that's the same thing with housing. You have to look at how everything has a knock-on effect. So there's lots of things that can be done technically. We know we have the solutions, but actually delivering those solutions is failing. And our report does look specifically into some of those failings. So if you're involved, I very much recommend that you read that report and give us feedback. We want to hear from you. And we welcome people writing for the Centre for New Midlands about these subjects as well. So we're open to being able to project your voice out there. But so I think there's an attitude problem and there's also a technical problem. We do have the solutions, but how do we get there? So I'm sorry I haven't provided that answer, but
well, I say you need to provide the answer to how we get there.
Yes, well, that report does look at that. So please do have a read. It's the same old thing. This same situation has been going on for decades now.
And this is what we're desperately trying to change. And look, there are housing associations out there that we're working with that are making really proactive steps. And it's really
the fundamental problem is we have overcrowding in our houses, and we have houses that were built not for having people having showers, not for washing their clothes every day, all of these things. The buildings were never built to deal with that amount of moisture in a home.
Correct, absolutely correct. And that is where solutions need to be brought in that will mitigate that. And that's where I think there needs to be a big shift, realizing that sometimes there isn't a construction fix and it's a management situation, not actually ripping the building apart.
Thank you. Sorry, Elizabeth, please do.
Oh no, I was just going to say to James, we should connect and carry on this conversation another time.
And look, I want to say it now before I forget. Residents, HAs, contractors, please do engage with us. We want to hear everyone's voice. We are a private company. We have no allegiances to anyone. We deal with private sector and social sector. So, and we're very much about educating the space. So if you have an opinion on this or you have comments or feedback for us, please feel free to engage with us. We really do want to hear from everyone. We're big believers that this is a situation that needs to be fixed by everyone. It's not going to go away if we don't work as a team.
Jim, I'm going to bring you in and then I'm going to go to John first.
Right, okay. Well, firstly, regarding the properties, initially, if you looked at Victorian properties, you would find that they didn't suffer from damp and mould with the coal fires and everything else. So there's that one. The other thing is, as far as you're concerned, James, my own opinion is that when people go into a job interview and they say at this stage of the job interview that they can do the job, are skilled at the job and know the job, they should do it and not be waiting for lessons to be learned and be given instruction by people like yourselves. Surely if they're on those sort of salaries, James, I'm sure you'd agree, they should know the job. Secondly, when they do come to do a job, the problem is that they will arrive at the job after the tenants waited 2-3 weeks for the job to be completed, only to say, oh, I'm sorry, this isn't in my remit, this isn't what I do, you need a joiner, you need a roofer or whatever else. Then the tenants has to wait another further few weeks for somebody else to come out. Now, in a situation for me, when somebody comes to complete a job, whether they can do it or not, that job remains until that job is completed. It's not rearranged as another job. They send out the right serviceman, the right surveyor to do the down job, get it done. We know there's shortages with staff. That's taken into consideration as well. But use the staff to your best of ability. And if needs be, try and work with other housing associations in a cooperative way. If you're short of a plumber and other housing associations, if you're non-for-profit, work together. You're not there to try and make profit. You're there for the good of the tenants. So having had the experience last week, I can give you this now, and I'm not, as Matt can tell you, one for, usually standing against the situation. I try to look for a very equal comparisons. But when I was here last week on the call, we had the guys outside mowing the lawn. And as they mowed the lawn, I didn't think anything of it. I thought, oh, great, they're just mowing the grass. Outside, we have a perimeter fence around the bungalow, joint co-bungalow that I share with another tenant. And he heard a crunch and a bang. Didn't think anything of it until later on a neighbour next door knocked on and said, did we realise that when the ground force team were mowing the lawns, the landscapers, they'd gone through our fence? Never bothered to knock on the door to let us know what was happening or anything else. So I contacted them, made the point that it wasn't a question of wanting it done immediately. It was just a question of good manners, I would have thought, just to knock on the door and say, look, sorry, this has happened. We'll raise it as a repair and get it done. There's only a panel needs replacing. But instead of that, I understand we go through the practice of the complaints handling code and following, the policies and things like that. But that to me wasn't followed. I'm still waiting now just to have it acknowledged that they've actually done the damage. So I was very disappointed in that, especially when I'm forever saying how great our housing association is. But I also do say that they make mistakes and they try and rectify it, and they have done.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, I understand what you're saying, James. Look, a lot of this comes down to customer service at the end of the day. I've been in the customer service sector across many industries for the better part of 3 decades now, 2.5 decades. And I think one thing that is always stuck with me is treat people as you expect to be treated. People make mistakes. If you make a mistake, own it, deal with it, and put it right. So we try to put things in place with our company that make sure that we get the job done and get it job first time round. So before we install anything, we always ask to speak to the tenants, make sure the date's convenient. We do a video tour with the tenants of the property to make sure that we've looked at any potential risks that would stop implementation of the install. And we have a very thorough checklist. So only once we have all the data and all the information will we go ahead with the installation. Otherwise, as you said, you're going to get there, you're going to have a problem, and you're not going to be able to fulfill the job, and it's a pain for everyone. No one wants to sit in all day waiting for a contractor to turn up, only for the job not to get completed. And I think that's some of the frustration that we're seeing come out, especially from some of the local authorities that we see and housing associations, is getting engagement from tenants, so it becomes a partnership. If we ring a tenant up and say, look, we want to put the machine here, have you got a plug socket nearby? Can you do a quick, WhatsApp call with us or a video call? If we get engagement, the problem becomes so much simpler for everyone. So I really think you're right. Things need to be done properly first time around, and the job's open until it's not. But if we can get onboardment from everyone and everyone takes a little bit of responsibility, it makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, but
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to bring you in. Jim, I'll come back to you.
Matt, please.
Huh?
1 second. It's only just to say that you can see that the housing associations, for the most part, are trying and they are doing. But it's just these failures. For me, the job should just be completed as one job and not put back. We'll look at it again. That's all I'm saying. And I think if they did that, we'd be fine.
Thank you, James. John, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. One of the things that I come across regularly is that there is a lack of ownership by senior management of the organisation. The culture change needs to happen, and it's only by good leadership. I mean, looking at the examples that we've had this morning, the leadership should have accepted the issues that were going on and addressed them. And whatever was needed to train their staff to recognise all the issues, and that would have happened. And I feel that that is not happening. The Ombudsman last week in his report pointed out that leadership does need to change. I'm in an organisation where young members of staff, relatively new members of staff, have ideas and things that they want to put forward and trial and pilot. And there is a real drive from the younger members of staff. But it's been sat on for a different use a different word, by senior management, a reluctance to change the whole organisation, and that has to happen. Without that, we shall just continue to fail. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, John. And this was, ironically, last week's roundtable was whether or not social housing has a willingness to change. And I think what got a little bit lost at the beginning of the conversation was that because the time customer comes up, and then as soon as customer comes up, the whole conversation can change. And I think, well, I know what Elaine was trying to say is if genuinely housing associations were treated as a customer service business rather than a landlord, most would have failed. Because actually, if you do change your mindset, not to think of tenants as customers, I'm not calling tenants customers or anything to that effect, but if you think about the fact that it's a customer service delivery, because that's the terminology we use, to everything else is customer-led and everything else, and effectively in private sector, it is customer-led because you have choice, and I appreciate it's very different again. But if you think about it in that mindset, the basics of what we need to deliver are good quality accommodation that is safe and habitable to use. And the thing that came out of me of the report that really stuck out to me is just before I got, because a couple of points in the chat, Bob Skipper's put, we all know how important the damp and mould issue is, but we should know it. But should it be to the detriment of general repairs? Money is tight. HAs are not employing extra staff for this. And then Martha has said, as an advisor at CAB, I often see cases in both private and social housing where tenants feel left behind and neglected due to damp and mould. When I explore what action they've taken, some clients aren't aware of their right to complain. Others have complained for they're not taken seriously. I find I often have to assist with using jargon such as Category 1 emergency hazard in order for landlords to take action. Compare that to the private sector. I don't care why my Amazon delivery hasn't shown up. If it hasn't shown up, I'm going to complain. I'm going to get my money back in 12 minutes and then I'm going to buy it again, or I'm going to go buy it elsewhere. That's the level we're used to now in terms of customer delivery. Expectation isn't as high. I think landlords are terrified that for some reason all tenants are going to say, well, I want it fixed. I want it fixed immediately, and you have to come fix it within 12 hours. Else, tenants aren't asking that. At least the ones I'm not asking. They're going, look, can you just make sure I'm safe, please? Can you just make sure I'm somewhere that I'm warm, I'm safe, and my house is habitable? And when you're coming through that cycle, it's that mindset shift and that cultural shift, as you say, John, the amount of younger people I'm speaking to, or the amount of people who have been chomping at the bit for a long time now, actually, not necessarily younger people, anyone from kind of 20 to 40, 45 in that bracket going, I've been trying to change things for a long time and it just ain't happening, so I'm going to leave and become a consultant. It's driving me bananas because the change is there and the willingness that there is a desire, because these are people who are out with tenants every single day. And unfortunately, I agree, it comes top down. There's leadership. I'll let you respond, John, and then I'm going to go. Case Management Solution Group, or CMSG, are the home of React, the UK's #1 case management system for ASB and community safety. We are delighted to have them as one of our key sponsors for Social Housing Roundtable 2025 into 2026. And with the ASB app now fully integrated to the platform, it allows residents to record, monitor and report issues directly to their case office in live time. What's not to love? CMSG are bringing simplicity back to case management, and I cannot recommend them enough and thank them for all of their support through this period and through the rest of the year. Thank you, CMSG, and do please go check them out on social media and on LinkedIn. Thank you. It's Thomas.
Exactly. Can I just come back on that, please, if you don't mind, Matt? By not listening to the staff, they are risking the staff that have been well motivated leaving the organisation, and then you're having to start the whole process again. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, looking at an annual report last year from my area, 48% staff satisfaction with their job. What's going on? It's ridiculous.
And this is one of the big things, actually, when you go back to James's point about Rochdale 5 years ago, and if you listen to Amanda, the new chief executive, I am desperate to go onto this roundtable one day because she's phenomenal in terms of her viewpoints and her ownership of what went wrong. Even though she wasn't there when it went wrong, she said, in the day, our housing officers knew, our repairs teams knew, and our teams knew, but we didn't change. And that's the mindset shift and the culture shift that's going on over there. Thomas, thanks for being patient. I'm going to bring you in.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's been a really, really interesting conversation. I can't help but sort of like resonate and agree with points from everybody. Like obviously, I agree with what John's saying. I think as much as it's been a multifaceted thing that's created the problem, like building pathology, difference in terms of, like you say, the amount of residents now within properties and how they get used and how dynamics are different within how people use homes now, like showers and obviously tumble dryers, etc., and washing clothes within homes. Them things all need to be taken into consideration. But I think that then the approach and how to deal with this needs to be different. You can't say technology is the answer for everything. You can't say that engagement just with residents is the answer for everything. I mean, I wholeheartedly don't agree with the whole approach that we've done with CIH level 4 and level 5 just for senior management, because I think that going to John's point and to the other gentleman's point, because it's James who's had engineers work within the homes, and I don't think it's necessarily chucking them in front of an hour presentation and saying this is what you need to do. I think it's about actually bringing it right back to the morality of people and trying to actually get that cognitive dissonance. I'm a big fan of cognitive dissonance. I think if you look, for example, I think was it last year, off the top of my head, benefits that weren't claimed were in the region of 22 to 24 billion pound. And I think one of your people earlier said that the impact on the NHS having around about over £1 million impact on the NHS because of these issues. Well, universal credits, only 77% of people claim the universal credits that they're entitled to. Only around about 66% of pensioners claim the pensions that they're entitled to. People don't know about benefits that you can get with regards to broadband, water, warm homes grants. These are the kind of things that we should be energizing our engineers on, not just housing officers. You're lucky if a housing officer, like a housing member of staff, goes into a property once a year, in my opinion. You're lucky if that. But if your repairs are being done, people are going into people's properties 5, 6, 7, 8 times a year, between your gas engineers, your electricians, your plumbers, your plasterers, your surveyors, all of them different people. And it's not about making them experts on everything. It's about giving them cognitive dissonance. How do you engage them? How do you just give them a little bit of advice in regards to get them to do a benefit assessment on themselves and on their friends or family, someone that they think may be eligible, their grandparents, someone that they have within the family. It takes 10 minutes to do a benefit assessment these days. It's not a long time. And you have that grip then. If you find someone that's actually entitled to universal credits, that could be £700 to £900 a year. That could be the difference between having the heating on or the heating off. I think Ellie Holt, the COO from Peabody? She did an article on this, and it was really interesting about the link between residents that don't want to open their windows because of the impact on the cost. So again, a lot of this does come down to cost, and a lot of it comes down to, unfortunately, things go wrong when people stop talking. And I think we put engineers into the situation where engineers. I've been an engineer myself. I know that it can be an awkward situation when you're in a resident's home about thinking that you might not be able to say certain things because of impacting your job. It needs to be able to open the dialogue and have them conversations, but it needs to come from a.
I know you're saying this as kind of someone who works in building safety and compliance for a landlord. So thank you very much for kind of the insight. And do you think your teams would engage if there was that ability to upskill those knowledge bases? And like I said, we're not asking for all building safety people telling me the aspects and benefits, but to be able to kind of give a few tools and go, by the way, have you seen X, Y, Z?
Well, yeah, it takes half an hour. It's not this approach of having a day to become a benefit guru. Do a benefit assessment on yourself. Do a benefit assessment on a couple of people that you may know. that you think may be eligible for it. My sister is the example that I will always use. Her and her husband both work full-time jobs. They got 5 kids, and for only until about 2 years ago, she realized that she was actually eligible for some benefits because both of them worked. They didn't think they were eligible for anything. People are out there expecting that, and it's this misconception that it's being done by someone else, or that if you were entitled to it, someone would be knocking down your door saying, "Oh, come on, you're entitled to that £700 a year." It's not the case. The numbers demonstrate that it's not the case. Again, perfect example was another housing association I worked in, where a poor gentleman had retired. About 5 years later, he was in rent arrears, and we then finally started to look into why was he in rent arrears? How can we help him? Why are we waiting for that gentleman to have used all of his pension for that he was entitled to, that he got as a lump sum, to then become in dire needs and be in rent arrears, to then start helping people? This should be common knowledge. People should know what they're entitled to, and it starts from the front end. It's not just doing a CIH level 4 or level 5. That's important in itself, but we need to be educating the people on the ground, and you need to be getting them engaged and actually have that social and moral value back into the field. Sorry, got onto a bit of a soapbox, but yeah.
No, thank you, Thomas. James, I'm going to come back to you to kind of respond on that one. Just before, I appreciate John, James, and Brian got the hand up. Sarah Seeger's also asked to come in. We haven't heard from her yet, so I'm going to go to Sarah first, but after James Green. But James, on that, I guess that's the mindset you're also pushing, which is why are we waiting for something to go wrong before we start actually acting?
So it's a really interesting point, Thomas, what you said. So we see a lot of assets. And I spoke to a tenant recently. We went in and did an installation, and I was actually there myself. So I'm really keen to learn what triggers the process. It was a 2-bedroom flat, mum, dad, 3 kids. So a little overcrowded, but I wouldn't say massively extreme. It was a fairly big flat. Both extractor fans had what I'd say were on their last legs. Condensation on the windows was absolutely horrendous. No trickle vents. Mum works from home. She's doing a lot of cooking during the day, and the curtains were black, and I mean black with mold. The doors had started getting mold spores on it. All the timber around the bathroom had started getting it. There was a lot of mold present. And I said to the father, I said, how long's this been here? 7 months. I said, why haven't you reported it? We didn't want to cause a problem. And I said to him, I looked at the daughter's bed. Daughter was 3 or 4 years old, and there was mold on the duvet. And I was like, you are putting your family at risk. You need to say something, and you need to tell your landlord. Now, in fairness to the landlord, the maintenance guy had gone in, he'd noticed it. It got flagged. But this is private rental sector. Landlord called us, and we were dealing with it. But the mindset of a tenant to keep quiet because they didn't want to be trouble, as his words were, just stunned me. You know, I've got 3 kids. As a parent, if my kids were sleeping with mold in their rooms, I'd be hopping up and down. So we're desperately trying to understand, how do we change the conversation and the mindset? So as Thomas said, that people, that be residents, landlords, maintenance guys, become a little bit more aware of the risks. We shouldn't be seeing these Rochdale and Camden situations on the news before we go, oh, something needs to be done. We need to be more aware that mold is a killer.
I'm going to bring in Sarah. Like Grant had put in the chat there, he's put a really interesting piece around import insulation, outdated windows, other parts of the things he's put there that stood out to me was landlords in the UK are not always legally obliged to take proactive action unless a tenant reports the issue until it becomes a category 1 hazard. He agrees with what Elizabeth said, but that's part of the problem. We're miles behind on technology with our European counterparts. Gary has said there needs to be better education from all sides, both tenants and landlords. There are situations where some tenants may unknowingly contribute to conditions as well as landlord repairs that are unsuitable or poorly executed. And Martha said in the HOS repairs report, contractor exits were mentioned as something landlords need to work towards bettering in order to improve quality. So it's clear that, you know, a lot of people here are agreeing with you. At the point that Kai has mentioned, I'll come to in a minute, but Sarah, over to you first.
Yeah, I thought I'd jump on and give my 2 penneth worth. And for me, I think one particular issue, we've got loads of data that we don't use in our sector. So I know in my organisation where I am now that we've got all the repairs history. So not only can we see who's got damp and mould now, but we can see who's had previous damp and mould. And in an organisation where I worked before, I worked with a data scientist, and we're like, okay, find the properties where it keeps coming back. And that in itself was a revelation because no one had actually done that before. And so we were spending an increasing amount of money each year managing symptoms rather than getting at the root cause. And the data demonstrated that perfectly. And when I dug a little deeper, one of the things that became really clear was the quality of the surveying being done was very mixed. And colleagues' understanding of damp and mould and looking at a property in relation to the people living in it was really mixed. And what was going on was there was a default setting where I don't understand what's happening in this house, and therefore it just needs ventilating more. And so they were fitting extraction or more ventilation or telling the customers not to dry their laundry at home, despite the fact there was nowhere outside to dry it. And all they were achieving was making the property colder. And then customers were blocking off said ventilation and not using it because they jumped straight to ventilation without going, hang on, look, yeah, done a proper survey and there's some cold bridging going on here, or there's a fabric failure, or, you know, why is that bit of wall freezing cold on that side of the property, whatever it may be. So we had to do a lot of work providing equipment and training for the surveyors to get them to a consistent standard. And that's still tricksy. Even the damp industry itself can't agree on the right way to assess all of these things. So there is a problem that runs wider than our sector in terms of surveying and understanding of these systemic building issues. But I also think where the social housing sector is really responsible and needs to think differently is a lot of our repairs and maintenance systems are entirely predicated on managing works orders. And so you put a job on, it gets done in timescale, checkbox, happy days. No clear indication of whether that solved the problem. And as organisations, we very much need to move away from the management and oversight of works orders and very much looking at it as a customer journey. And so I always advocate really strongly that damp and mould is a case. You are managing a case with a beginning, a middle and an end. And that case may contain various jobs. But if you haven't solved the problem, that case should stay open. And we should still be challenged about that. And there should still be oversight of that case. But so often what happens is we do a bunch of jobs and we go away again and we don't check that we solved the problem. We don't keep that case live until we have fixed it. And I know sometimes the problems are really hard to fix. So a whole bunch of the cases that I've had oversight of, you know, we've had to work really hard and it's taken longer than the Awaab's Law timescales to get to the bottom of it. But what we found increasingly was, yes, there were building issues to address. I'm not into blaming tenants for conditions in their homes, but we have a real problem with fuel poverty exacerbating building defects, and we sometimes don't look at those two things as a whole. And you reach a point where you have done everything you can with a building in terms of you've checked the insulation, you've checked that it's performing properly, there's no leaky guttering, you know, everything's as it should be, but there's still problems because it's so cold. So I've dealt with a lady this winter and it's quite often 12 degrees in her living room. So no matter what she does, there's going to be issues there ongoing for us to manage.
So I get that it's hard, and I get that it's not always easy to find the answers. But if we don't start thinking of this as a customer journey, we will just be throwing good money after bad by treating symptoms constantly. That's certainly the journey I've been on. I don't know if that resonates with other people on the call, but for me, those are some big priority things that we can train our surveyors up, we can do our customer journey mapping and put that into action. So although a lot of about damp and mould is hard, there is absolutely things that the sector can do to make it less bad, for sure.
Sarah, thank you for sharing. I think there's two things if I may just respond on, just from our side. One is the lady with the 12-degree living room. Let's speak after. We might be able to have a solution for you that will sort that out. But I think what I'd like to get your take on is, you just said damp and mould sometimes takes a very long time to fix. You know, building fabric tracking can take months, if not longer. How are you planning on dealing with this come October and making sure that tenants stay safe in that gap while you're doing the due diligence? We fully understand that. Where we are trying to step into the market is saying, okay, you know you've got a problem. Let us help you mitigate and manage that issue while you research the problem. What's your plans for that?
Well, I've got to admit, it's not the bit of the business I've got oversight of. So what I've been dealing with is come about as part of my complaint management. So I know that my colleague is preparing at pace, and we do already have some case management in place. So we know how long it's taking for us to go and identify the problem. We know how quickly we get the surveyor there. We know how quickly it's taking us to write the report. So I think what our focus is on quite a lot is how can we comply with the requirements of the process. The bit that I've been encouraging in my policy role is that data layering part. So, for example, we've had a look at how many homes have we got where we've had damp and mould in the last 24 months. We know that a customer in the property has got a respiratory issue that may be exacerbated by that, and we know they're due or overdue their stock condition survey. So we're trying to pull people out using data and identify the most at risk and prioritise visits to those properties. So we're building our knowledge base that way by trying to combine the data that we got on the customers and the data we have on the property to pull out our areas of priority and try and be more proactive with those ones.
Thank you very, very much, Sarah. A couple of points in the chat, because I know we've got some people as well with hands up. So Kai had mentioned earlier, a point that I ask our asset management, I'm just giving you that, a point that I ask our asset and maintenance team on procurement is when looking at the qualifications of contract. Thank you.
We don't normally.
There we are. Hopefully that'll stay muted. Fantastic. A point that I ask our asset and maintenance teams on procurement is when looking at the qualifications of contractors, why do we not have stipulated in the contract more on customer service training and look more into their complaints? Contractors are ambassadors for your organisation, so saying they're external contractors is not an excuse for poor work quality and customer service. We need to look more into procurement and what values we look for in contractors, not just values for money. Sue has said that surely keeping your assets in good order is the priority of all landlords, and that gives benefits to tenants in better thermal worth, less illnesses from unhealthy homes. Hazel, from my experience, there is a disconnect with housing associations and local authorities focusing on asset and not necessarily the impact on the people who live in the home. By not responding appropriately to CDM, this could ultimately risk in a range of safeguarding issues. HAs, LAs and their contractors have a duty to identify and report safeguarding concerns, which must be evident in many of these homes where CDM is prevalent. Is there a different leverage here to use safeguarding as a pivot for change? The impact on the well-being of the operatives who are witnessing the CDM issues and how this affects the households when visiting homes also needs to be considered. As Paul has said, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Martha has pointed out that, as Richard Blakeway stated in the HOS report, a home is an emotional place and a repair is more than a job. When we consider Category 1 hazards and the increasing number of tenants which live in unsafe conditions, landlords need to amend procedures in making sure they have plans, resources, funding, contractors and staff in place to address these emergency hazards. Just seeing if I've missed any. Tony said that, I think this goes back to someone's point earlier, this is a fundamental problem. If people haven't claimed benefits, they automatically assume there are no benefits available to them. And then Kai mentioned on James's point earlier, it's a common theme of people being very, very wary of being kicked out of their homes if they complain. Grant called it retaliatory eviction. Paul, repairs in large organisations are highly transactional and landlords don't spot where things go wrong. Lucy's backed this up, saying this is so true. Sadly, housing officers, operatives, tenancy sustainment officers report concerns but are often heard on deaf ears. And Jamie said, very insightful, Sarah, works orders can often be considered as sacred artifacts rather than a means to a greater end. Backed up by David, who's mentioned that data not always being used to its potential, damp and mould monitoring and alerting solutions can also identify and highlight instances of fuel poverty, which in the winter may be just as dangerous as damp and mould. John, I noticed you had your hand up and raised a point, but I can't see your desk. So I'm going to quickly go to Jim because we've got about 2 minutes left. So Jim, I'll come into you for a quick one, and then we'll go to Brian, John if he's back, and then to James for final thoughts. But Jim, over to you for a quick one.
Okay, just very quickly, just thinking in terms of the fact of the grants and things like that. I think it's a generational thing where you get people who may be getting into the middle 70s, late 60s and that, who don't expect anything, so they won't push themselves forward for it. Our housing association uses the rent officers for these kind of things, fuel, poverty, anything like that. They will direct and look at a case, and if they feel a tenant should have it, they'll have it. When I spoke to Hacked about it, they said the reason they like to do it this way is because otherwise everybody would be just going for the vouchers all the time. So they try to select and make sure they're going to the right place. You know, when they do it, they want people to know about it, but, you know, that was the sort of thing that I got back from them. And really, that's it. The same with the damp and mould. Just come and do the job if you can straight away. That's the thing. If it's identified, get on with it and do it, and stop just talking about it.
Thank you, Jim. Always a slightly, I think that probably backs up Thomas's point earlier, which is that's coming from Hacked, and yet it's actually repairs officers and operatives who are in the house more often and more likely to see when things are going wrong than any housing officer. Unfortunately, will probably get time to do so. But Brian, over to you.
I think what's probably missing from this is the trust that tenants and residents have with their landlord, and it has been lost over the years. But it's knowing the tenants. It's actually knowing the people. Years ago, when you had rent collectors who went around from house to house, they knew if somebody was unemployed. They knew if somebody needed to be directed towards benefit. They knew if these people. Unfortunately, now with technology and everything else, while it's great and it gives us this opportunity, it's missing the down to earth conversations that have with people who live in the properties. Because if you don't know that there's 10 people living in a property, if you don't know that there's somebody who's on a pension and is not getting the benefits they should be getting, you're never going to be able to help them. You're missing that communication. And it's a big word, but building trust, you build it through good communication and understanding. And it's been lost. And technology is taking over that conversation. The conversation that we can have here is not happening on the ground. So knowing the people who are in your properties, knowing your properties are fundamental points to managing properties. It's then when you move on and you can deal with a problem and an issue. But if you don't know the people who are there and you haven't got the boots on the ground, you're never going to be able to solve the problems that are going on in the States, be it damp and mold, be it antisocial behavior or whatever.
Thank you, Brian. And where we've got about a minute left, but John, I know you had your hand up before. Did you want, were there any final points you wanted to make before I go to James on final for his final thoughts? You're still on mute at the moment. Let me just get you unmuted. Just noticed that one. There we are. We did get one today. We actually got you on mute. I didn't think we were going to get one today, but see if we can. Might not be working. I know John had put in the chat there, can remind everyone that to decamp tenants to repair damp and mould, the tenant requires to be informed that furniture may have to be disposed of and thorough cleansing of all soft material property. This may require support from funds to replace furniture disposal. Removing damp and mould is only one part of the equation. Don't bring it back by putting property back that's impregnated with mould. And another really important educational piece to think about. And as Judith has said, the benefit system is really complex, especially if you aren't able to use the internet. We don't trust people coming into our homes. And Martha's mentioned sometimes there's a disconnect and a culture divide. Trust can bridge that gap, but that only comes from action. James, I think it's fair to say you brought a hell of a conversation to the round table today. What are your final thoughts? And I know I've shared your LinkedIn in the chat there, but any final thoughts you'd like to leave the group with?
Yeah, firstly, thank you everyone for coming. It's been a great chat, and look forward to many more roundtables with you guys. So a couple of final points. One, we're a technology company, but we're built on trust. We're a human touch company. We speak to everyone. So if you're a tenant and you know someone or you are suffering with damp, condensation or mold, call us. Please contact us. We are here to help. We've got advice. We can speak to you. We can speak to your landlords on your behalf. Please don't leave it. It is a dangerous thing to leave. Two, if you've got damp and mold again, don't clean it yourselves. It's extremely dangerous. Please tell your landlord. And finally, if we can just all take away from this conversation that it's teamwork that's going to solve this problem. As Brian just said, it is building trust. Trust your contractors, trust your landlords, and landlords trust your contractors and technology companies. We're here to help. So it's really a joint effort to make sure that we stop seeing these situations.
Thank you very, very much. Please do reach out to James, connect with him, follow up on today's conversation. James, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they wish to?
So LinkedIn is great. I'm on that all the time. So I'm going to put my, if you say you've put me in the chat. So
in there. And what if it's email or anything like that?
Yeah, I'll put my email in the group now, and feel free to drop me a line. We can speak on WhatsApp or speak on the phone or email. I'm very, very available. So feel free to contact me.
Well, a huge thank you to Breathe Pure for sponsoring today. A huge thank you to James for coming on and talking so openly, and I think really engaging the conversation in a very, very open way. Lots of different viewpoints, but I think all on a similar path. Do please join us again next week. We do have Devonshire's joining us next week to talk about something within the legal field that I'm just confirming what that's going to be. I'll confirm ASAP. Do please reach out to James at breathepure.co.uk if you're following up on any of the recordings and can't see the chat. But as I say, a huge thank you to you for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you all at a future roundtable every Tuesday at 11. Thanks everyone, and take care.